Hello, my name is Eileen Ramos, and my presentation is on the harms of gentrification. So, what is gentrification? Gentrification is the process of revitalizing a predominantly low income neighborhood or city to make it more desirable to a wealthier or more connected audience. This, in turn, replaces the area's original aesthetic and its original inhabitants with people from a higher socioeconomic standing. My position on the issue? Well, I think gentrification is inherently unethical and ultimately widens the inequality gap. Gentrification creates more societal issues than benefits for the working class and other marginalized communities. The two central arguments surrounding gentrification are argument one, which is in favor of gentrification. Some argue it improves the quality of life for all residents. Argument two being against gentrification, which stating that gentrification generates the displacement of residents, in turn creating more negative effects on communities than positive ones. In argument one, I analyzed an article called Three Cheers for Gentrification. Premises included in this article included there is nothing more unhealthy for a city than a monoculture of poverty. A monoculture of poverty results in higher crime, higher homelessness, and food insecurities. Conclusion: gentrification is usually good news because removing monocultures of poverty is better for the city. Thus, gentrification is better for the residents of the city. But the negative implications outweigh the positive ones. By removing these monoculture of poverties, they aren't getting rid of people in poverty, they're just moving them away from the city. The displacement of residents of these it creates like a positive change for those already in a higher class and a higher degree of access than those who don't have access, such as like the lower class and working class and other marginalized communities. This is why um, it's not necessarily true that gentrification doesn't necessarily mean it's better for the residents or the city. For argument two, we'll be addressing a dissertation called Assessing the Relationship Between Urban Redevelopment, Gentrification, and Forced Displacement by Michael Pickett. Um, it was based on a case study conducted in Houston, Texas, in a low income neighborhood called the Third Ward. Um, According to the case study by Michael Pickett, when residents were displaced due to gentrification, there was a decrease in economic investment in the area, while costing the taxpayers more money for a greater police presence that ultimately did not benefit anyone nor the community. While gentrification may beautify an area, making it attractive to those of a higher class, it ultimately widens the inequality gap by forcing the already low income residents into an even lower socioeconomic standing and allowing the higher class to profit from this process. Some premises and conclusions in the dissertation by Michael Pickett would include gentrification causes displacement of low resource residents. Um, Displacement causes already marginalized communities to be forced out of their homes and into worse areas. And gentrification is discriminatory, in which people of color and working class residents were disproportionately affected by displacement. Conclusions following would be gentrification creates more negative impacts on already marginalized communities. And displacement is both an intentional and unintentional result of gentrification. If something is discriminatory, then it is inherently unethical. Therefore, gentrification is unethical. Potential fallacies um, that can be used to argue against gentrification would be the genetic fallacy. Um, and this is because gentrification stems from a practice called redlining. Redlining made it clear made clear distinctions in which um, where people were allowed to live. In the earlier half of the 20th century, redlining was a discriminatory practice put in place for neighborhoods that were predominantly people of color were literally circled in red in order to discourage investors and banks from investing in these areas or lending loan to these peoples that lived in them. As you can see, this is a map from 1930s of LA. The areas that are white are actually places that had yet to be categorized in the tier system of green being best place to live in, which included Beverly Hills and other high class areas. Um, Blue meant still good, but not as desirable as green. This is where many businessmen lived and average middle class people lived in. Yellow meant that these areas were in decline, which often were because they were a population of immigrants and but not necessarily immigrants of color. Many of these were, Italians, Russians, and other white immigrants. They were still categorized as in decline because they were not uh, uh, appealing still. And red meant um, that these are hazardous or dangerous areas, which were predominantly people of color and working class residents. Um, and many of the areas that were once redlined now mirror areas that are getting gentrified, like Boyle Heights and other various areas like that. Another potential fallacy would be the appeal to pity. Um, by displacing residents, many of these low income families are pushed into more economically depressed communities than the ones they had previously lived in. This means that they're going, they're leaving their area that are now they are seeing is being improved with better funding, more accessibility, and just more things to help the community and the residents. And now they are not even able to use these amenities and these new uh, um, things that they have now access to because they are forced to leave and forced to go into areas that are more poverty stricken because these are the areas that they can afford once they can no longer afford where they once lived and had roots in. So when a community has asked to be revitalized, gentrification has them wishing no change would have been done at all. For it causes drastic change and uproots many of the community. Gentrification makes changes not for the people currently there, but for someone else who has no ties to the community. In conclusion, gentrification generates more societal problems with displacement than positive ones. As you can see in a picture right here, it's an area of where homeless people are concentrated. This creates lower quality of life and continues to perpetuate higher crime, um, higher drug use, um, higher policing, more violent policing as well, and it keeps the cycle of that gentrification creates positive change for socioeconomic elite while sabotaging the lower class. And these are some peer-reviewed journals I used. Yeah, thank you.